to Piqua 3 years ago, I was told about the support and partnerships that this community provides, and tonight is just another example of that. It's amazing that when we put out the request for people to show up and be involved, the community always responds. So thank you very much for being here this evening. This is a group of individuals in this room who have the ability to make things happen in this community. The invites went out to developers, to property owners, to end users, to community leaders who, again, have the ability to come together and make positive things happen within our community. Kind of an outline of how things are going to go. I will shut up here real soon, which I think everybody will be happy about. We can hear from some experts on some of the exciting things that you see around the room. So we'll do a presentation about rebuilding cities from David Gamble, who is for sure an expert in that subject. We'll also talk about the Piqua Fund, which is designed as a gap financing tool to help these projects come to light. And then we'll dismiss, and we'll be around for questions afterwards. I would like to take a minute to recognize some of the partners that pull these things together. So this is presented under the I Love Piqua series, which is something that we instituted a couple of years ago, and have been very successful in meeting groups like this together to talk about what our opportunities are. Grow Piqua Now, Piqua Improvement Corporation, Piqua Area Chamber of Commerce, the City of Piqua, and Main Street all work together for events such as this. At this point, I'd like to bring up our city planner, Chris Schmiesing, who will talk about the Piqua Fund and what we're trying to accomplish with that. So Chris, please join me.
So it's a pleasure to be here this evening, and so exciting to see all of you in the room, so many strong supporters of the great things that happen in our community day in and day out. So thank you all for taking the time to be here. My part's relatively easy or brief. I'm simply going to describe to you what the Piqua Fund is intended to be. And as Justin said, simply put, it's a way to create a pool of capital to help projects that are in need of assistance to move forward that wouldn't otherwise be able to move forward in the absence of that capital. So if you look at the mission statement, it's pretty straightforward. Piqua Fund is there to accelerate Piqua's renaissance through targeted capital investments in catalytic real estate development and redevelopment projects. So what is a catalytic development or redevelopment project? It's those projects that citizens of Piqua and business leaders in Piqua have identified as being important to the continued growth and success of our community. And a lot of those projects represent redevelopment opportunities of existing buildings or infill development on existing sites. And usually they come with a layer of complexities related to special financing needs or special infrastructure needs or land acquisition challenges and things that require a multifaceted approach to be able to achieve the desired outcomes. So when we talk about the Piqua Fund, we're really talking about a group of interests that each bring to the table a special set of skills that are all important and critical to achieving the goal of redeveloping the property or properties that are being discussed. So when you look at this, you have the City of Piqua, a municipal government interest who can obviously be a party to delivering and sustaining the public infrastructure that's important to the project. You've got the Piqua Improvement Corporation, an established entity who has defined powers by statute that allow them to provide development type services, land acquisition efforts, and do other things that can be conducive to accomplishing the end goal. And then the Piqua Fund, which is really the private sector piece of the puzzle, and it represents the local capital the investment dollars that can assist with achieving the desired outcome in completing these projects. So you can see on the table here, there's different roles for each of these partners, and they each have particular tools, if you will, in their toolbox, roles that they play. Each is stronger or better suited at a particular role than the other. But it takes all three of these interests. It takes all of these groups working together, both the public sector and the private sector, and everything in between, to achieve what we're aiming to achieve. So just to sum it up here, the iPiqua partnership, which is what the iPiqua Fund is really about, is supporting the efforts that we've described. If they're successful, they will accomplish all of these things. And these are the same things that you tell us in planning meetings and different discussions when we're talking about neighborhoods in the community that are ripe for redevelopment, be it the downtown or certain corridors. You described to us that you would like to see the redevelopment and reuse of the vacant buildings, and that you would desire to retain and attract additional businesses and employees and jobs. And you want us to enhance places of interest in the community, preserve and enrich our small town character. These are all things that are important to the citizens and businesses in Piqua, and the iPiqua Fund can play a part in helping accomplish these things. And finally, encouraging building renovations and quality development and redevelopment projects. This is so important to defining the quality of place in our community and lifting up the quality of life so that we can offer the amenities that not only our residents and our businesses desire, but also those folks who may be contemplating moving here or those businesses that may be thinking about locating here. So those are the outcomes that are targeted. Fortunately for us, as Justin referenced to, we live in a community where we have a lot of individuals who are willing to step up and take the lead when there's a need for something to get done. And so as we began discussing this concept of the iPiqua Fund a couple years ago, and we were referring to examples in other communities. Hamilton has the Core Fund, Cincinnati has 3CDC, there's the Louisville Downtown Partnership, the Northern Kentucky Fund, and so on and so forth. It began to resonate with some folks in the community who said, we understand, this is needed, let's do this. And so kudos to Brett Weimeister, Doug Haynes, and Mike Hume for stepping up and being the organizing founders of the iPiqua Fund, and to Mike Gutman for providing the legal counsel to put together the legal paperwork necessary to make that happen. So just a quick round of applause for those guys. So in just a minute, we're going to introduce David Gamble, our guest speaker this evening, who's going to share with you some pretty interesting things. I think you'll find the similarities between some of the things he'll talk about and what we're talking about doing here in Piqua very interesting. But before we go there, I'd like to introduce Andrew White and Lauren White. Andrew and Lauren are the co-owners of Indigo Life Media, a marketing and media firm in Dayton. And they also are the co-creators and operators of the Nucleus Co-Share co-working collaboration space in Dayton. And they bring to the discussion some perspective from the entrepreneurial side of the table and how that relates to the importance of developing a quality of place in your community. So Andrew and Lauren, if you come on up and share with us your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll take an applause for that. I require energy around me, so thank you. First off, I'm Andrew White, and my beautiful wife, Lauren. And I want to start off our 5 minutes with you to acknowledge each and every one of you. Because what you're doing right now, this room is filled with people who believe in something. You believe in possibility. You believe in opportunity. And you believe in your community. And with that, anything is possible. So I want to acknowledge you for your selflessness and your time and your belief in something, because I can see it. We can see it, and I know you can see it. There's proof in the pudding right here. So I wanted to acknowledge you guys to start this off because it is about the community, it is about the people, and you guys believe in the people, and that's awesome. So I just want to do that. That's my part. See you guys later.
Yeah, and honestly, 2 years ago, before the nucleus creation happened, none of us would have understood terms like economic development or placemaking quite like we do now. We kind of tripped into the conversation, and that was organic. And so that's a big part of what I want to talk about is how can you harness the organic nature of things that are happening in Piqua right now that you're not aware of. And this whole vision is already attracting it. Like we're already talking to all of our friends who even like live in Dayton, like, let's get a party bus and take people on Piqua when this thing happens. Like, so you're casting that vision, and that's exactly what attracted us to run our business in Dayton and to create a nonprofit venture to foster and support other businesses to grow there. And there were resources in Dayton that were available that supported us with open arms, the same way that Andrew and I have felt incredibly welcomed by the city of Piqua to be a part of this vision. We know how amazing it is. All of this is exciting, and that's because the thing that drives Andrew and I daily, our why, is connecting with individuals, because relationships are at the core of us living a fulfilling life. And it's the memories and the moments that are going to be created in this space that make it so exciting for me to see. And if you want to jump in and just share a little bit about how we just get really excited about seeing things that will contribute to that lifestyle. You know, there's little pockets here and there in Dayton, there's little pockets here and there, but the ability to connect it all, to create that sense of place that enhances your lifestyle, the memories after you're done with your work day, the places you get to go and enjoy live music, that is so incredibly attractive, especially to the generations coming. You know, a lot of us millennials have been told that we're crazy because we're willing to give up great salaries to chase our dreams because it's about quality of life more than it's about making a ton of money.
Mic drop. That was pretty good. So just a background relatedness to understand what the heck these two logos are and what we really do. Indigo Life Media is a video marketing agency. We are experts in building virtual relationships. So we help businesses, nonprofits, organizations help get their products out to the masses with authentic video marketing. We've had an agency for 11 years, and out of that, I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years, and I've been able to be successful in what I do is because of the people around me and relationships that I've created. So, like Lauren shared, 2 years ago, Nucleus Co-Share was born, and Nucleus is a nonprofit co-working space that we saw a need in the community because we knew so many entrepreneurs. And at the time, the city was kind of still walking around going, I think we're supporting the entrepreneurs. They had no clue. They're giving money, and then they're asking for that money back within a certain time frame. That leaves an entrepreneur really kind of in a hard place. So we just felt the need with some other friends that organically happened, and we created Nucleus. And it's a low barrier entry, $150 a month. These individuals can now have an opportunity to run their business out of this space and be supported by other entrepreneurs. So our membership now is at about over almost 70 people, and over 30 businesses are based inside of Nucleus, paying only $150 to work and be around other amazing people. And with that, it's rippling out into our economic development in the downtown area, and now they're getting their own space because they were supported. So at this time, we are currently feeding this animal, and we're growing it to give it away to the community. But we believe in it, so we'll invest in it, because we know that'll come right back to us. And that is something that I have seen here in Piqua that I just admire, and I told Chris, please, if there's anything we can do to share our knowledge, because I know the millennials operate a lot differently, and the generations coming after the millennials operate even more different. How can we be ahead of that, and how can we be ready for that? And you guys are definitely doing it, because this right here is what it's about, and we're getting back to the community, we're getting back to family, we're getting back to that, and
And we're all about having the nucleus here. We have a whole vision to make it a regional reciprocity model where everything can be collective success across our region. So we're getting ready to launch one in Fairborn. The city's been a huge help in supporting that initiative. So yeah, hopefully you'll be seeing us around more.
Thank you very much.
So you can begin to kind of see the connection between some of the things we talk about wanting to do in terms of attracting back the youth to our community, the young professionals, the millennials, all the above, and how that relates to what we're talking about here. Thank you, Andrew and Warren, for coming this evening. I really appreciate it. I know I think they need to duck out. They've got some Valentine's Eve plans, and I know I'm cramping some of your style this evening on a number of fronts, so we appreciate you being here, and thank you. Let's go now to our keynote speaker. David Gamble is a lecturer in the Department of Urban Planning and Design in the Graduate School of Design at Harvard University. He is a registered architect and certified urban planner and principal of Gamble and Associates based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And in his practice, he focuses on urban revitalization and community development. David and his team produced all of the placemaking images you see over there. And this incredible model, which depicts to scale what those improvements might look like. And they continue to work feverishly on our construction documents so that the vision for the Lot 9 park space improvements can actually be constructed very soon. David is also a husband and a father, and in his free time, he recently completed or fulfilled his dream of publishing a book. And as the co-author of Rebuilding the American City, he has literally written the book on how to revitalize your downtown waterfronts. So without further ado, let me introduce David Gamble.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thanks to Justin and Gary and Nikki and everyone that we've been working with over the last really 2 years here at Piqua. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. My practice is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but I grew up in Northeast Ohio, Ohio's sharpest corner, as my mom likes to say, Conneaut, Ohio. She worked for the chamber, so they say those types of things. And I'm also here with Cassie and Sarah from Booker Design Collaborative, who are our landscape architects, and Robert Pass, who's also coming up from Louisville. We have a big team, actually, that's been working on this over the last year and a half, and we're thrilled to show you some of the things that we've been working on, and actually some of the things that have been incubating here in the community over the last, really, generation. And so I want to echo the comment that was made as Lauren was walking out the door about connections, because so much of this work is really about connections, but not just for the millennials, actually for people of all generations. It's an amazing time for cities, and there's so much that's going on across the country, and what I wanted to do is to show you some of those examples in these other cities, and also then talk specifically about why you all are so perfectly poised for transformation. So, the book that Chris mentioned, Rebuilding the American City, my colleague Patty, who teaches at Washington University, she actually teaches urban designers about planning. I teach urban planners about urban design, and that's just a bunch of jargon. But you can think about planning as setting up a framework, as a strategy. Architecture, you sort of know what that is, a single building, and urban design is the bridge between the two. And this placemaking strategy that we were brought in early on to develop a series of networks through the downtown that would in fact create a stronger sense of place. And And there are so many ingredients here in Piqua that you already know that you have, and they're poised for transformation with some additional investments. So I'll talk a little bit about Piqua, but also about what other cities are doing, and you might be familiar with some of these other cities. We looked at, well, the biggest one is in Brooklyn, about 700,000 people, but the smallest one is in Green Bay. Even in smaller cities, 100,000 people, there's some amazing transformations going on. We try to get a range of scales, we try to get a geographic distribution, essentially answering the question, if a student would ask me, show me a good example of where a transit line has catalyzed redevelopment, or what's a good model of an institution growing a neighborhood? Well, sometimes we have to think hard about those. So the book is really trying to answer those questions, and we had a number of criteria. One is it had to be a city, so that means essentially over 100,000. It had to be complete or nearly complete, the project did. We were looking for interesting stories, and about 2/3 of the book is actually interviews with people who were involved in the project's implementation, as well as design excellence. So my hope is that in 4 or 5 years, when we do Rebuilding the American Town, selfishly, Piqua will be one of those cases, because you really do have so many great ingredients in place. And just briefly, this will be hard to see from a distance, but each case has a little map. And the book is structured along 5 paradigms, essentially 5 different ways that cities are regenerated. This isn't the only 5, but they tend to be pretty substantial. So institutions are catalysts. Hospitals, universities are catalysts for their surroundings. And we looked at Buffalo, Philadelphia, and New Orleans. Riverfronts, which Piqua would fit very well. Chattanooga, Green Bay, and New York. We looked at historic building fabrics, and increasingly, like this building, like the Edison building, people like historic structures. They're interesting. There's a level of authenticity. And so we chose 3 cities where the historic building fabric was a catalyst, but the reaction, the actual design intervention, was something contemporary. I was speaking with Rod earlier, and he was trying to describe this great tension between something contemporary and something historic. And increasingly, people actually like, they're drawn to those environments. Atlanta, Birmingham, and Houston is about a park network, about a trail network, just like this. And then Denver, Louisville, and Portland are instances where transit networks have been catalysts. So there's great things happening around the United States. And if you're traveling, you're probably seeing these things. But that doesn't mean there aren't challenges. In fact, one of the results of this book is, I think, evidence that American planning isn't necessarily reactionary, that there are things happening that the public sector is leading that's creating development opportunities. I like to think of that relationship between the public and the private sector in this way. The public sector writes the playbook, but the private sector executes the plays. And so many themes in these projects are about relationships between the public and private partnerships that actually make these things happen. It's almost without exception. These things have to happen in collaboration. So let's just talk about some of those challenges, and I'm sure you're familiar with these. The public increasingly demands access to waterfronts. Unfortunately, a lot of highways cut off riverfronts from the downtowns, like in Chattanooga, or here in Philadelphia, where it's not just the highway, but it's also the regional rail and the Amtrak, and 24 acres of vacant parking space. Atlanta, Georgia is practically the poster child for suburban sprawl and congestion. Well, they're doing a 22-mile regional network of bike trails and a transit line in their downtown. It's the biggest redevelopment project across the country. Highways cutting through downtowns, it's almost hard to fathom today that that would happen, but it certainly happened 2 generations ago. And in San Francisco, our case was actually what happened when the highway came down after the 1989 earthquake, and what were the creative design and implementation strategies to actually allow that to be something interesting. Urban renewal cast a broad shadow across planning, I think, for generations, and many people still look at planning as somewhat suspect because of instances where large areas of cities have been removed, like in St. Louis. One of the most interesting transformations for public space space are actually occurring in what are traditionally thought of as residual spaces, forgotten spaces, old industrial corridors, like in Houston, where the city began at the foot of this bayou. It's called a bayou in the south of the river. Basically was covered over because it was covered by the highway. We have increased storm events that are causing havoc across the United States. Actually, the Houston example here, it continues to flood constantly in the downtown core, or in New Orleans. Industry still has a foothold in many different cities across the country, but in many cases the industry has moved or it's left. And how does one re-engage the waterfront, like here in Brooklyn, where these 6 piers now are 85 acres of parkland that's generating millions of dollars of redevelopment adjacent to the parkland because of the real estate values are so high. There are many downtown malls that are not what we thought they would be in the 1960s and 70s. Here in Green Bay, that was a downtown mall from a 1956 Victor Gruen plan. It was a famous award-winning plan. But like a lot of downtown malls, well, it was insular, and it didn't have a relationship to the waterfront. And when a person accidentally fell over from the parking structure and the mall died, the city had to think of a new way to engage its Fox River, and they created a 4-block long riverfront investment. So many cities still look like this. This is heavy industry in Portland, Oregon. The photograph is from the 1950s or 60s, but it doesn't look much different than that today, where you have actual shipbuilding industries along the river, the Willamette River, but this area has become totally transformed because of a public sector investment in light rail that now makes this whole site much more accessible. But we suffer from environmental degradation in many places. Denver, big old vacant station with lots of rail. In Birmingham, they don't have a riverfront, but they have a train front. And the active train line still cuts directly through the city. And this was a 19-acre vacant space from the train yard. It's now a remarkable public park. It's re-centered the downtown because it's now an asset. Here's the Beltline in Atlanta, Georgia. And in Buffalo, this is the only project I personally worked on in the book, but we spent about 15 years trying to make a collection of medical, hospital, research-related institutions more than share a territory, but actually become a catalyst for the surroundings and begin to create the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, which is in fact regenerating the seams with the neighborhoods. This is not that old. This is in St. Louis, in an area where a young couple, designers and developers, begin buying up these homes one at a time within a 3-block area and have begun to transform in a very concentrated place, transform this whole neighborhood. In this area where eminent domain was very prevalent. And then in Louisville, I don't know how many of you have been down on West Main Street in Louisville. Raise your hand. Well, it looked like this 20 years ago, and now it's hard to find a space that isn't occupied on the ground floor. This happened because the public sector invested in a streetscape that actually began to create a certain momentum whereby cultural institutions began to locate there. This is now a remarkable place on West Main Street in Louisville. And San Antonio, the case here is basically a big old brewery that had been vacant for generations, and a developer went in and said, you know, there's something special here. Let's actually take advantage of this historic character. And some of the things we'll talk about today, in a way, are much easier than what you guys have accomplished in this building. And when I was talking to Doug Haynes, who's Doug, nearly everybody can remember when this thing was a room. And now it's hard to imagine what would have happened had this building gone away. And it happened because of the passion and the attitude of the public to make sure that this actually didn't get demolished. So as I said, much of the stories are told by people that we interviewed, and that was some of the most enlightening aspects of the projects. This will be hard to see, but I really wanted to say that there are public sector people, like mayors who have gone on to become senators and governors, and there's private sectors, individuals, nonprofit organizations, developers, journalists, and all of these people actually were instrumental in making these things happen. Leadership came through in every case, but that wasn't as instrumental as partnerships. So what is it that you guys have that makes me so confident that this place is going to be very different in just a few years from now? Well, the locks themselves, in most cases, are hard to find. In fact, it's hard to find here, but it doesn't need to be. So tomorrow morning, we're meeting with the ground-penetrating radar company who's going to see what's underneath that Lock 9 park, and we're going to excavate that thing to the bottom, and we're going to support it, and that's actually going to be the relationship between Water Street and your bike path. The distance between your downtown and the riverfront is so close, but it seems so distant because, well, in many cases you can't see the space. And Kurt Reinhardt's here from the Miami Conservancy District, and they themselves are trying to find opportunities where one can lay back the levee wall in order to increase its capacity and make a better relationship to the downtown. So the model that you see there is essentially, there's a performance pavilion. Here's Water Street, here's Main Street. We have broken some rules and played with other people's properties. I don't think Steve and Sally Smith are here, or Watson are here, but we've shown some things on their property. I guarantee you are aware of this, and we have had conversations with them, but I don't want you to misconstrue that that's part of this project. That's not part of Lock 9 Park, but certainly the investment in the public space will catalyze building a project like that. We're fairly sure of that. And so here's the lock space, and unlike Lockington or actually Tip City, where the lock is a space that you just walk in and walk out, in this instance you can actually walk through the space. So that's the whole idea here in Piqua that will make this unique. Here's the bike path, the train line is here on the bottom, and you can walk right up that path. It's 15 feet wide, the lock is 90 feet long. Jim, I think you would confirm that for us, Jimoto. And so that's the space that you walk by. There's a couple large tree groves. This is large enough to accommodate 3,500 people at your Rock Piqua events or downriver, down a beer. So we scaled it appropriately. But it's also a space that you can occupy with just a few people. We think it's an appropriately scaled space, and we've been working with the landscape architects to ensure that. So this is the Chattanooga case, where essentially the foot of Main Street was divided from the riverfront by this highway, and the landscape architects actually went underneath the highway to make that relationship. This is called the Passage, which is actually where the Cherokee Indians on the Trail of Tears departed to Oklahoma. And so the space actually is not only a beautiful space to occupy, but it commemorates that. And it engages Cherokee artists to think about their culture and what that means for the future. You've got beautiful buildings right downtown that are, fortunately, have been just painted over and covered up. They haven't been demolished like you see in other places. It's so easy to imagine this Owners building as a mixed-use building that would have groceries on the ground floor, apartments on the upper stories. It could be something that brings in life down to the downtown. It actually lays out very well for residential up above. This building, which is right across the street, this Owners could look something like that. Imagine windows facing the river. I've been up on that roof that Chris let us up to. It's got some of the best views in the city. You have a trail network already in place. You don't have to create it. You simply have to make that connection stronger. This is the Houston example. And now people that didn't have access to the waterfront can have it because the connections are stronger into the downtown. Joe and Lori, you guys took a risk years ago, actually, before these investments had even been made. And so again, another lesson in this book is sometimes the public sector has to lay the foundation, but sometimes it's the private sector that takes the risk. In fact, Keith, whose building just falls off our model, sorry about that. We can expand the model. is another one of these beautiful old buildings that now will have a new relationship to the park that it didn't have in the past. And so these are just a couple more instances where, with the right alignment of politics, great things can happen. We think that the contrast between the historic and the new can be very interesting, and this is an example in Indianapolis where the lock actually has an old component but also new limestone. We think this is a good example of this photo Chris showed us. And communities are eager, and they compete for attention, actually. They compete for resources. They're eager to celebrate their authenticity and their uniqueness. And again, Lock 9 is a great potential for that. Well, we had a tour about a year ago, and I think there was over 100 people that walked through the Edison building, the Zollinger building. I'm not sure how many people here are able to do that. So not that many. But just walking through these spaces, it's hard not to see their potential, because buildings, their uses change, but the form endures. So it's not so much about separating uses anymore as it is about providing places where different types of uses can come together. So whether or not this building is an acre space for nucleus, the Piqua foothold of nucleus, or if it's a coffee shop, that's less important than the fact that it's activated. We also find that downtown, increasingly like Harvest Pantry, people want unique experiences in their shopping. And we just did a little scale overlay of the Home Depot and the Walmart here, over here downtown. So that's what the orange line is. And this is the parking lot for that. And that's not unlike everything that you see in most suburbs. But look at the dimension of that. It actually spans 4 blocks by 2 blocks. Now just imagine all of the different businesses that you have here in your downtown who are starting to relocate because it's more interesting to park once and to walk around to some of these stores than it is to simply go to a mall. And when one looks at the density of the downtown, so again, here's Water Street and Main Street, here's Lock 9 Park, to think about all of the different uses that used to be in there, it's pretty amazing. And so we looked at the old fire insurance maps, and we looked at every map. There's about 10 over the years, and these were some of the uses that used to be there in 1892. Leather store, bank, bar, printing. But the orange ones are the ones that are coming back. So we've got running store and local foods and ice cream and arts and crafts and coffee shops. I mean, look how it's already happening. Like all this interest is coming back into these spaces, even some of them that are too small. But they have tin ceilings and they have an exposed brick, and more people of all ages are really looking to that as a place to be. So locks, I've learned a lot through this process. Usually it took about 15 to 20 minutes for a boat to go down a lock, which is why you always had a tavern. Because people need to do something while they're waiting. And they had oftentimes a hotel, and sometimes a place for the lock person to live. And those 3 uses happened a lot, and before that could happen again. So again, you've all been in these spaces. I think it's already happening here locally, where it's organic and it's authentic, and it's going to continue because people around the country are looking for these types of experiences. We did, as I said, we played around with other people's properties, and we think this would be a great hotel if one took the stairs that are in each individual building and filled the gap in. It's a 17-foot gap with elevators, stairs. Steve Watson will fall off his chair when I show him this because it's not what he would do, but it's hard not to think about the potential of something like this on the park and its ability to interface with the downtown. So, just wanted to go through a couple of these other cases in more detail. And this is the Houston case. This is underneath that highway that I showed you before. It's only 1.6 miles long, but that bayou, which still floods, is no longer a sewer. It's actually now a bike trail that connects to a regional watershed. So underneath these highways, you have the Buffalo Bayou Promenade that is designed to accommodate flooding, so the landscape is performative. It actually has a role to play as it floods. But it's also beautiful, and it's creating tremendous development potential all around Houston. And this is a major 30-year endeavor that also the flood control district is a big part of. Along the riverfront, the aura of a city resides. And one often thinks of the Great Miami as the back door, when in fact it's your front door. And I think people will begin to see that more as Lock 9 Park is redeveloped, because that's where the life is. I mean, yes, it's in the downtown, but if you have a strong riverfront and a strong trail network, and the relationship between them is strong, then it will become much more of a catalyst, to use the word that Chris used. Another big lesson in all of these projects was that despite the fact that they seem to occur fairly rapidly, in many instances it took a generation or more of grassroots, hard activism. And in Houston, what they did for the first 15 years is they took school kids out and the school kids planted trees. And they cleaned it up and they held canoe races in this dirty old bayou, because that started to raise people's consciousness of the river. And they bought a skimmer boat, and they held a competition in the high schools to name it. And the winner called it the Mighty Tiny. And they painted it bright pink, and it scooped up all of the stuff that came down the bayou after the flooding. And that, again, is a small thing, but it helped people think differently about their water course. Here's the Beltline in Atlanta, Georgia. How many of you are familiar with this? Just one. I guarantee you'll hear a lot more about it. This is Ryan Gravel, who in 1999 was a graduate student at Georgia Tech. He had this idea about taking these old rail lines and making it into a transit corridor around the whole city. And he got a city council member interested, who then became city council president, who then got the governor's interest. And just 2 weeks ago, the city of Atlanta invested $4 billion, because this is a bike path, but it's also a light rail right-of-way. And that's a 100-foot right-of-way that's connecting some of the richest and poorest neighborhoods in the city. This was a freight course before, so now you've got a very different condition. And the joke is that people will drive to the Beltline just to walk, because there's so few places in downtown Atlanta to walk around. And so there's all kinds of races, and this is that right of way. And look at the development that's being spurred around its edges, because now you've got opportunities for recreation and health and wellness. And that is another one of these themes that's running throughout cities across the United States. Access to open space, to trail networks, and again, you've got it. It just has to be connected. Brooklyn, which is a bit of an outlier in the book because of its size, has 325 events per year in Brooklyn Bridge Park that's free and open to the public. Events don't make money, but they bring people down to the river. And this is what, again, you're down a river, down a beer, which is one of the best names I can think of for an event. And the Rock Piqua event, they're doing the right things. You're getting people to a location that they hadn't received before. This is the San Antonio case. And this is what it looks like today. The new construction is appropriately scaled, but it doesn't try to mimic the historic. It actually makes the historic richer, because the new buildings are contemporary and fresh. And the developer bought the entire property with 90 acres, including the streets, because the level of quality that they could do here from the private sector was greater, and they didn't want to rely on historic tax credits because they didn't want to be limited in what they might be able to achieve in the architecture. They attracted a Culinary Institute of America who hadn't been in the Southwest before. That school for cooks spawned 13 restaurants in this now district. So you've got access to a wide range of food that you never had before. And they grabbed a lot of things that were in the old buildings and brought them down onto the street as interesting fragments, like this object here. is the St. Louis, this used to be a gas station. This is what this small design development firm have begun transforming some of these smaller buildings into unique spaces. In the San Francisco case, so this is actually, you start to see this in other locations, but 6 or 7 years ago, this wasn't so new. They brought in shipping containers, and store owners who didn't want to pay for a bricks and mortar space bought the shipping container, but then they can move it to wherever they want. And that shipping container is fresh and contemporary, and there are dozens of events that occur on a daily basis that bring people to this site. And they call it Proxy, P-R-O-X-Y, because it was supposed to be a placeholder for some other development in the future, because this happened during the economic crisis. In fact, most of these projects occurred during the economic crisis. And it's become so successful as a placemaking initiative that the neighborhoods don't want to see it gone away, despite the fact that there's pressure for affordable housing. So at the end of the day, many of these cases are both a celebration of the great things that are happening, and they're a recognition that there's more things to be done. And I think that as a culture, we are still struggling with issues of social equity, of access, of affordability, of environmental degradation, of infrastructure, which seems to be inhibiting things from happening. But there are positives happening around the country, and again, you guys have so many opportunities here. Just a couple more lessons and a few more details. In Chattanooga, so this is the 21st Century Park. And in Chattanooga, they also have an Piqua partnership. They call it the 21st Century Fund. So there was an 85-acre park space, and this was that highway again, and they went underneath it. And I want to read to you what then Mayor Corker, now Senator Bob Corker, said about this project. So many cities get caught up in having these studies done, and they collect dust on the shelf for 10 years. But what really energizes a city is to have a plan and then implement it immediately. Go make it happen. People sense it and they know it. They can see it in your eyes and they know it's going to happen, and that to me is the entire game changer. That was a great quote, because he came from a construction background, and mayors who come from a construction background make sure they get things done. He, through a personal relationship with the Department of Transportation Secretary of the state, was able to get this in one lunch meeting, able to get this highway downgraded from a state road to a local road. That allowed him to put it on a road diet to make it smaller and to do bridges below it and over top of it. And that's where this politics are so essential. I have to say, as much as we like Lake Lockline Park, to have those 16-wheelers, going right in front of the Main Street is not helpful. And it would be great if there was a way that those things could be rerouted. It's not essential, but I think that's one of those lessons. And so this is this space that goes underneath the highway where local artists were brought in to create really unique spaces. This is the water feature there. And the head of the Cherokee Indian tribe who we interviewed said, one of the artists came in and they were going to put 200 life-size sculptures of Cherokee Indians in suffering pose walking away. And he said, don't tell that story. The Cherokee people did not die on this trail. Tell the living story. And these artists who were Cherokee Indians themselves created some really beautiful artwork. And so here's the plan of this project with the river. And the important thing I want to stress to you tonight is that the three primary institutions, a modern art museum, a children's museum, and the aquarium, pooled their donor lists together. And all the money that was raised went into one fund. That fund was used to support the development of the park space itself. The mayor, Bob Corker, did a hotel-motel tax, like 2 cents, and that raised 49%, basically 50% of $120 million was raised through the hotel-motel tax, because they realized that more people were going to come downtown if in fact it was a nice place to be. And 45% came from the private sector. Of that, 75% of that sum were greater than $1 million. And this is in Chattanooga. This is a small city. But look at the relationship of those two things to get this to happen. Moreover, he did it in 90 days. This money was raised in 90 days, and the project was completed in 32 months. And the other thing that the mayor says is, look, people want to see these things get done. Plans linger. In fact, planning lingers. A lot of projects don't need to take as long as they seem to, in part because if the right alignment happens, you can actually get things accomplished. So each of our cases, here's in this stipple pattern is the public space, but there are over 300 new units of housing downtown, directly adjacent to this park, and all of this is happening because of the urban design and the landscape. So here's the park, and transformations in riverfronts really tend to happen during shifts in economic cycles. We're in an economic cycle here and a shift, and that's why I think your time is so right. How are we doing on time? Okay, so let me I'll just briefly wrap up. I wanted to show you a couple more images about your Lockhart Park, but here's the Green Bay example. It's only 4 blocks long, 60 feet wide. That's what they call the city deck. It's contemporary, it's cool. It doesn't have to be green and yellow like the Packers, so everything is in Green Bay. And because of that, people like it, because it's fresh. And Patty, my co-author, and I make a joke that we couldn't go to any of these spaces, we visited them all, without seeing some kind of yoga class or a Pilates class, because it looks like they're praying to the Fox River, right? Everything's happening there on the waterfront. Here's in Birmingham. Again, it just happened almost without exception. Here's the Beltline. Here's the downtown Atlanta. That's the 22 miles, the 45 neighborhoods that are now going to have access to light rail. Never had them before. Just remarkable. This is an old Sears Roebuck, a vacant, 1 million square foot Sears Roebuck distribution space, vacant, now on the east side Beltline. And it's so popular, there's a bike valet that takes bikes into the building. It's sick. Because it's so cool, and just people are, love to see this happen. And here's the Beltline now. I mean, that's what it looked like a year and a half ago, anticipating this trail. So developers were capitalizing on it. So there was a great start in, 1990. They just didn't dig deep enough. This is from Jim Oda's book about the history of Piqua. But this is Lockdown Park, where the students came in. We want them to dig deeper, and I think we can uncover more. Just briefly, here's a couple images to give you a sense of why the space was designed in this manner. Prehistoric, Piqua had a little low wall around it, a stone wall. A little bit like what's down south, but we think we can do something better. And so here's the lock space, and this orange line basically represents a new limestone wall that we're wrapping around the site, and of which this pavilion sits on top of. So when you look at this model, the gray color in the model is essentially excavating the historic block and then extending the little low wall to provide an edge to the park. And there's a number of focus areas. So here's the pavilion, here's the performance lawn, we have these tree groves, here's the lock space itself, this is the water feature, here's the bike trail. And these are some of the images that our landscape architects are using. This is a great space to show this low wall. This is the type of environment, the types of environments that we're imagining. Shaded, comfortable, interesting to be in. We had to anticipate something like this. And so our performance pavilion is actually recalling the historic sheds that used to be in the region. And we're trying to do something very simple, but contemporary and fresh. So the performance pavilion is actually, this is a local example for me in Boston at the Arboretum. So that's the type of performance pavilion that we're anticipating. Here's a section going down to the bike trail of that performance pavilion. This is that tree grove. We love the fact that this bridge is there and it's rusting, and I wouldn't touch that at all. I would let that patina be there. It doesn't need painted, just light it, and that'll be the coolest piece of infrastructure in the region. I'm sure that it's so impressionable. Here's this tree grove that we're doing. It look a lot like that. And I can assure you we have lots more details on the plant species, and Sarah and Cassie will be upset for me for blowing through these, but I want to get food. And then lastly, it's hard not to look at historic photographs and pine for what used to be there, actually. When you walk into cities and you see what was there. This was in fact a bridge that spanned over the canal 100 years ago. We think there's a way to recreate those moments, and we have a little bridge that spans over our water feature. So it's not as ambitious as this, but maybe there are ways, educational ways, to include moments like this. Here's this little waterfall along the spillway in the Lockbank Park. And this might be the overview then, where you can actually learn about the history of the site. Here's Keith's building off in the distance. Here's the locked space coming down to the waterfront end. Again, we are so honored to work with you on this space. I think it's going to be really transformative, and there's so many good things happening. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight, and we'd be happy to answer more questions. And with that, I'll turn it back to Justin.
I've come to realize that oftentimes, as David mentioned, we pine for things that were, and really how we feel about our community is that we want it the same but better, right? We don't want to change the things that we love, but we see opportunities for improvement and advancement, and that's really what we're talking about this evening. You may look at some of those pictures and examples and say, well, we're not San Antonio or San Francisco or Brooklyn, we're not Green Bay or even Chattanooga. But we are. We have a river. We have trails. We have old, cool buildings that can see new life. So all of those elements that David described, we have, and we can capitalize on those. Some of those opportunities will work themselves forward. I walk through the halls of the city building every day and see pictures like this. And some of you may look at these pictures and say, well, that'll never happen in my lifetime. And the reality is it already is happening in your lifetime. Some of those examples are here this evening, so I'd like to give them just a minute to talk about their projects. So Joe and Lori, if you would maybe take a minute to kind of share your building and your story and the investment that you've made in our downtown.
I didn't know I was speaking tonight. A little long after a Harvard professor. So give it a shot. As they've said, I'm Joe Reiser, my wife Lori, longtime owners of a small candy and coffee business here in town. And I kind of fit into this story in a lot of different ways, not only as a business owner, but as a citizen who uses the running trails quite frequently, and to have the opportunity to see it become part of the park is an exciting thing. But for us, we started, Laura and I bought the business almost 24 years ago. And at that time, it was one store over on Water Street that her father had created. And we purchased it thinking we would move it to Columbus, where we had lived and anticipated living. And we quickly found out that you don't pick up a 30-year-old business at the time and move it. And what we also learned is we had this not only core collection of customers that were absolutely amazing, but we had this core collection of employees that we knew we wouldn't find anywhere else. And one of them, who was she would stay 2 years and help me out. She's now been with us 24 years. She just celebrated her 85th birthday. She still works 3 days a week, and she's a core part of this community, and so she's part of what keeps us going. But we were working away in our small building on Water Street, in our little factory in the college, and we started to grow, and as we started to grow, we needed more space, but we didn't think, or in my mind, I'm not a business major, I'm a liberal arts major, I thought I can make a big investment and just do the same thing. It's not going to increase sales by building a big business. But so we started looking around anyway because we had to. We needed space. We looked again out of town, and again all those things came back about the reality of the community, the reality of the customer, and most important, the affordability. And we looked several different times at different buildings. We had visions of an historic old building. We had visions of a farm. We had visions of building on to some of ours. But the Piqua de Call building was sitting empty, and I thought it was ugly. And I didn't really have any interest in it. And a couple of realtors kept saying you should look at it. A couple of city people kept saying you should look at it. And so, very long story, and I'll try to make it short. We did look at it, I didn't like it. We put an offer on, it didn't work. I was happy that didn't happen.
I was happier.
So we thought we'll just continue on. At that time, we had 10 stores, planning of 2 more. And so we had to make a decision quickly for a lot of reasons. And so the building was still empty a year later, 2 years later. Put an offer on it. And now, as many of you have been through it, and I tell people every time we go through, that building was built for us. We just let the paper use it for 30 or 50 or 100 years because it fits us like a glove. It's unbelievable how this building, not only does it fit us from a functionality standpoint, but from a retailing standpoint, from a visibility to the community standpoint, all those things. And my fear about making an investment in downtown that wouldn't increase my revenues was totally wrong. Our retail sales in general in that space almost tripled from where we were before. The city population didn't triple. The traffic through town didn't triple, but the visibility and the support of the community was pretty amazing. So it's kind of interesting that I'm standing here today chatting because this happens to be the single busiest retail day in the chocolate industry. I'm sorry, it's the second busiest, the most busiest tomorrow. And for those of you who have not taken care of your Valentine's shopping, you should do that. But Christmas and Easter are much bigger, but these are the 2 busiest days. But I just looked, when I was looking at my phone, checking our sales numbers, and we've had just under 600 transactions in downtown Piqua today. So that's at least 600, probably 800 people coming through our door in this small little town. And when I tell people in our industry, in the chocolate industry or coffee industry, that I have 4 stores in a rural farming community, actually 5 stores if you count the hospital, 5 stores in a rural farming community of 100,000 people, they can't believe it. But a big part of the success of that is this building we have in the middle of town. We made our investment. These guys have been talking all big words, and I think it's just time for all the rest of us to make your investment because it's going to pay you back in spades or in chocolates or in coffee, however. But it's important for, I think it's important for all of us that we're all committed to investing in some part of this little corner of downtown because for generations on, it's going to be quite important. I was teasing with some people and that could be a certain named hotel downtown. You don't have to run it, just put your name on it. All you do is write the check. So, but I don't know what you really want me to talk about tonight, but that's kind of our story. I think that what this work they're doing, we are in Atlanta and New York and whatever, because we're doing this work. And so it's just now, I run my business on a file called JFDI. And every Thursday I get the JFDI file out and I just friggin' do what's in it. So I think it's JFDI time, and then we just get it done. So.
I'm going to India, we've had people come from Scandinavia, and they love it so much here. They start looking for properties. So they would like to move their families here because they think what we have is really great. So.
I may not be the first shopper tomorrow, but I will be seeing you tomorrow. Keith, could you talk a little bit about what you've got going on and the investment and renovations that you have made in the Edison building?
Yeah, Brian, I'm not going to be as great a speaker as what you saw right before, but yeah, my name is Keith Bowman. We bought the old Piqua Color Center. The reason we bought it is because it was originally a power plant back in 1884. Just a little bit about myself. I'm not from Piqua. I am from Miami County. I'm from West Melton. I graduated from Melton Union Schools a long, long ago. For me, Piqua really from West Melton was like miles and miles away. The only thing I know about Piqua back then, it was the team that Troy beat every year in football. I was West Melton. Now, we played Sioux State, so I didn't know that. But, I'm an engineer at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, have been for 32 years, and eventually in your life, you start to look and say, what are you going to do with your life after you retire? For me, it's only 2.5 years. And so we wanted to do something a little bit local. I work 30 miles away from where I live. I'm not part of this community, and I wanted that place I could call my home. And so we looked around, and my wife and I were trying to figure out Life 2.0 what that was going to be. Was it something retail? Was it a general store? So obviously not going to be coffee because you guys got that wrapped up. And frankly, I don't drink coffee, sorry. But we looked around and looked, and we found this building. It was the Piqua Color Center. And it was an old building. But there's a history to that building. It's the original central station that Piqua had from a power plant perspective. There's a lot of misinformation about that building because of that. I'm an engineer. I thought it was great because it was connected back to Edison. Right? So every engineer loves Edison, unless they like Tesla when we together. But so we bought the building, and then we started digging into the history. And just so you know, out there at Rutgers University, they have tens of thousands of pages that have been digitized, scanned of what Edison's done, his folks, back and forth. And there was 400 pages on this building alone. So you start reading through that, and there's actually correspondences between the folks, or between Edison and his bunch and the people back here. And one of the things that kind of I thought was interesting is that Edison sent one of the guys out here to assess Piqua for a power plant. And then the answer that went back was that when you look at Piqua as a town of so many thousands of people, the industry was great. But they thought, the folks, as they call it, the Piqua gentlemen, the flushes and yours and those folks, that these people were innovative, they were visionary, they were forward-thinking, and that was the perfect place to put one of their central stations. Most people don't realize of all the central stations that went in the United States, the one here in Piqua was number 15. And that's pretty good when you consider all of the United States. It was the third in the state of Ohio, and right now it's the fourth remaining, oldest remaining in the United States. Definitely east of the Hudson, or west of the Hudson River. So this is a historical building. So like I said, we saw this and we thought, great, I don't care what we put into it, but as an engineer, I've got a passion, you got to fix it. And so it's two parts renovation, somewhat archaeological dig when you go through that building. Because every now and then you can find some things. So working, it's shaping up, it's slow. I've got just a couple of years before really it all has to come together before I retire, or maybe if I work a bit longer at the base. But when you look at all these pictures over here, the Edison building starts to show up. And when we bought the building in 2012, we didn't know anything about that. Again, as an engineer, passion, got to fix it. But then as you start to see all these little pictures, and you start to see that Edison building show up everywhere, it's like, it means more to the community than, it probably means as much to the community as it does to me. So when I work it, I take pride. And I think it's great that it's shaping up. We've had, we try to buy local, try to have local labor. Hems Glass, I think Jeff is here, somewhere. But we've had Hems Glass do all the work. We've had local roofing, do the roofing. We've had Mark Coverstone up in Sydney come down, and Mark Coverstone did an excellent job of all the masonry work. So like I said, we're trying to restore that back as close as we can get it at. Now, what are we going to do with it afterwards? I've heard coffee shops. I don't drink coffee. I've heard, hey, we need a brew pub. I don't drink beer, so I can't tell you good beer from bad beer. But we still got some options open a couple of years ago. We do think there's going to be something to draw the community into and kind of work with the rest of what's being planned over there. So just keep an eye on it. It's shaping up. It's going to happen. And then once it's done, the community will be invited in some form, whether it's a collaboration space to go to maker spaces or some form of cafe. So keep an eye on it, but it's coming along. Thanks.
It's fun to see a building that doesn't even have a defined use already start to breathe new life into the community. And Keith, I so appreciate the words that you spoke about how that building came to be in Piqua. A couple of years ago, the county did a branding study. In 2013, those results were released. And one of the questions asked in that study is, when you think of Piqua, what do you think of? And the exact words that were used in that study were dilapidated, run down, and backward. So to think of a community that was forward-thinking, perceived as forward-thinking, had come to a point where we know that's not true, but that's what the perception was. It's important that the things that we're trying to accomplish tonight happen because we know what kind of community we have and what the opportunities really are. Some of these investments will happen on their own. We're already starting to see that. Some investments will take a little bit more to accomplish. So John, would you take just maybe a minute to talk about what you see in the Piqua community and why you think it's a good opportunity for investment?
Thank you, Justin. He was my contact person. And when he mentioned this evening, and I'll keep this short, I'm in the hall with a brochure. In the front says Grow Piqua. And it shows the property we have under contract, the Fifth Third Bank, insurance office, and the Bear parking lot. But the other thing that's important after hearing Dave and his group that got my attention, we can go to page 3. I'm from Salina, but we were here with Empire Restaurant for over 20 years. So you talk about retirement, I'm 10 years past, and I'm starting over. After we sold Empire, I acquired a 60-acre tract to build a Walmart center in Salina. So here's a small community prove that when people work together, you can accomplish something. After I started the center, industry people came to me and said we needed a motel. So we partnered together, and I had a friend, we did Holiday Express. Then I acquired 300 acres behind it, and we now have a golf course and housing development. So this proves when you work with people, if in my brochure, I don't want to compete with yours, I'm out in the hall. If you go to the website, you'll then see a video of the housing development. There's 150 homes. So with time and people working together, and you have a natural of a community, that when you start something to make something happen, you need to keep moving forward, and it works with a pool of people. Thank you.
Doug, if you would, Doug Haynes is one of the board members of the Piqua Fund, which is really the reason that we're here this evening. If you would just speak a minute about the fund and what we're trying to accomplish with that.
This is the part where I think the doors are locked and the elevator's out of commission, so don't run, please. Actually, as you saw earlier, what Chris was showing, the Piqua development is actually 3 components. It's the Piqua Fund, the Piqua Improvement Corporation, and of course the City of Piqua. And to have this set up in place at this point in time would have been a wonderful thing a dozen years or so ago when we started looking at this project. Here was the building, Dale mentioned this building. But looking back on that process for this building where we sit today, when the private money, there was a lot of support from the city, a lot of plans, a lot of development, but it was the private money that really had to be established. And when that kicked off, and it was a historic day that really took off. And from that point, we went quickly around the city, we raised a good bit of money in a short period of time. That really solidified the project moving forward with the great support of the city of Piqua with the citizens. With the Piqua Fund, we want to get out ahead of the projects. That particular setup with the Piqua Plaza, we're kind of behind trying to force the project. We currently have about $275,000 to $300,000 in the fund. Our ideal target to be comfortable at this point would be somewhere around $2 million. Brett Baumeister, who is our president of the Piqua Fund, wasn't able to be here tonight. He's out of town on business, but he did let me know that tomorrow he's going to be at his office all day so I can bring that $2 million over to his office. So I have a big chore here. But we're actually looking at, as it was talked about earlier, you know, we can provide some gap financing. We can go in and make loans in some areas where there are vacant and abandoned buildings or brownfield issues. And some of those are a term that Brett uses to actually call those unbankable. These are things that most banks don't want to touch, those kind of things. We would be in the process to move money in and out to help people get started. He only ever used unbankable to me one other time. That was when I went in to try to get one personally about something, and he used that same word. So I guess that's a banking term. But seriously, we've established, Piqua's already established themselves that we can do a big project, as we are sitting here and recognizing tonight. But then we see these plans and some of the other things around the city, and truly the Piqua development is a process for the entire city. We're talking the gateways into the city, we're talking about all types of things that can affect all community issues, including housing, as well as some of the plans we see here tonight. So it really behooves us as the private sector to get behind this. It's set up in such a way that it is a 501c3, correct on that. And there's a couple different ways to invest into it, and we can get that information to you in detail. But we do need to try to get some large donors or contributors to this thing to get this going, because you can see here, you can see what we've done in the city and how the city has become really a gem in the last decade or so. It'd be so much easier for us to have that nest egg of money to help these developments in and out, and keep reassessing that money, or using it. So we appreciate the support we've got so far. We look forward to more. And this has been a nice evening. Nice to hear the story. So thank you.
Unfortunately, I did just get word that the elevators are down, so that will be all right your checkbooks, so we can get those fixed. To wrap up the evening, we hope that you are not only as excited as we are about the opportunities that we have, but are as committed as we are about the opportunities that we have. So you can trust that we will continue to make the public investments necessary for these projects to move forward, but that only makes sense if we also have the private investment to move these projects forward. So I appreciate all of you attending this evening. It truly is remarkable. This community, its will and its power to move things forward. And we look forward to a lot of exciting times to come. Thank you very much.